But as you proceed along this particular apophatic, catabolic way, you will find that there's enormous empowerment from it. You'll become really good at it. I try to teach it even to children when I've had the chance. So I believe in it thoroughly. It doesn't mean you completely negate other things, but it just is a new slant on things, a new way of approaching life that gives you a new set of filters, a new set of tools to work with life. And that becomes very, very empowering. Well, we're also being helped in this process by certain scientific discoveries, many involving the DNA, many involving consciousness itself. And we're starting to, just like the quantum scientists had to discover when they looked into the subatomic particle and something, that many of the shaman and many of the mystics of the past were quite right in what they spoke about when they talked about the ether or the infinite void and the way that consciousness would interrelate with matter. They were forced to accept, Heisenberg and Rutherford and many of these other people had to accept. Bohm, not Jacob Bohm, but Niels Bohr and Bohm, the other holographic theorists and quantum theorists, had to accept that the mystics of old were right. Now, in the work of people like Bruce Lipton, we're looking at consciousness and realizing that when we talk of things like body, DNA, fate, we are actually talking about consciousness. Not as Michael Tsarian would go on talking about, but in a scientific way. Really hardcore sciences can prove this now. There's many experiments that show this. To the point where they're saying, and rightly so, that DNA is not this Lego set that the media always shows you, that's sort of this construct. That's just an image. That's just a model. That doesn't exist within you, really. What exists within you is vibration, right? Which again is overlaid upon frequency, which is overlaid upon consciousness. So in other words, when they're talking about, heredity and genetics affecting your behavior and your life and all of these kinds of things, actually it's the reverse that's true. Consciousness is supreme. Consciousness is supreme. And consciousness is found in humans in the highest form. So DNA, the cells, your fate, all of these things, illness, like I said, destiny and fate, what happens to you, the people that you bring in front of you, the relationships you have, again, as we said in the beginning, your vision of yourself, which will then affect your vision of other people. All of this is rooted in consciousness. And therefore, the person who takes control of their consciousness, cleans their consciousness, like Blake said, the doors of perception. If you cleanse that, then you have absolute sovereignty over the body. And even your genetics and things. And scientists know this all too well. They're just not going to broadcast it to the public and open the door to selfhood, are they? I would go so far, and then the next step, of course, is to say, but there is one slight glitch with this, and that is that consciousness is not all conscious. The psychologists have pointed out, of course, that there's a thing called the unconscious, right? And Bruce Lipton accepts this because he even says that 99.9 something of our conscious is in the dark, so to speak. And the part that we use in everyday life is very, very small amount. I mean, he gives a really very small figure. And yet, there we are, using that tiny, tiny part of ourselves. So then, my work then has a lot of validity because I emphasize, as the psychologists do, that even though consciousness is the prime datum, you have a sensor between your conscious mind, the ego world, and this thing that they call unconscious, for want of a word. That part of the unconscious has been given other names. William Blake called it imagination, and others have called it the spirit or the soul, right? And in fact, that's what it is. It is actually the place where your true selfhood resides. So you can't really have the power we've been talking about until there's some sort of integration between the conscious and unconscious aspects. And again, what have we done? The road has just led us right back to the realm of psychology. So to answer your question in brief then, if we do not, and to re-emphasize what I said, if we do not work with psychology, not academically and all of that, I mean just a person going and studying it themselves and finding what they can get out of it themselves. And this may even include ventures into poetry and art, you see, and philosophy as well. We don't know. Or music, whatever. There's many aspects to this. But unless you do, well, you're going to remain a victim, if not of this tyranny of this age, of some other tyranny that'll pop up in its place tomorrow. And like William Blake said, that the fist that crushes the tyrant's head becomes a tyrant in its stead. If you look back through history, it's just been one big wall-to-wall tyranny from thousands of years ago. Babylonians, the history of Iceland, the history of Finland. Let's go back. Take the British colonies, the British Empire. Let's go back, to the Sumerians, the Indians, the Portuguese. Everything in this world has been just one club, bashing over somebody's head, or one tyrant replacing another tyrant. And it could be the same in the future. You might have a little more affluence, you might have a little less. You might have a little bit more egalitarianness. Women may have a little bit more freedom. They may not. A little bit more good, a little bit less. But you're talking about one endless process of tyranny. What my work is all about is to end it once and for all. And to do that, you've got to look deeply. I'm not just talking about spring cleaning, you see, and just a sort of superficial cleansing here. I believe in what the Maya talked about. We're in an age of awakening. There's even anecdotes and hints in the Bible and the other scriptures about this. So I very much believe it from my astrological work that this is upon us right now. So we have the chance to radically change the way things are, once and for all. Yeah. But it's not going to be done if consciousness is not brought to the table, because, of course, it all depends on whether there can be a healthy merging of the conscious and unconscious minds. And it is exactly that premise that the architects of control that I talk about in my work absolutely fear. I get a question a lot, do they fear us? Are they in fear? Yes, and that's the part they're afraid of, is if this starts to work, which is why they've misrepresented psychology to people. They bash all the conspiracy people. They don't want the galvanization of these different subject matters. They're very against it. They've seeded the movement with their own agents, like they did the Christian movement, and to make sure that there's a lot of, bickering and fighting and all these kinds of things. So they're very much adept at trying to make sure that this particular message doesn't get out. Because as long as you dive into the pigsty that they've created for you, i.e. the political sphere, the charitable sphere, the social spheres, they know that you're going to go round and round in circles, and you may take one step forward, but you can take 10 steps back. And you're ultimately under their dominion and under their rules. Because they've created this dialectic. They've created this, as David Icke says, problem, reaction, solution scenario. They've created the good cop, bad cop scenario. A little bit of good, a little bit of bad, you see. And they know that really nothing ultimately changes. You just have a topical good at the bottom of the pyramid, but the big boys at the top are not in any way threatened. So what I talk about is much more deeply, powerful than that. And it offers us tools to really change the status quo and put an arrow through the third eye of these people. Really, it's like see the underbelly and strike hard at the roots of evil rather than at the branches. When we even talk about soul, self, spirit, and so on, we are actually conditioned by theological interpretations of those things. So it would be wonderful in a perfect world if we could look at these words, you see, without that baggage. But given that we can't, and we just have to use those terms, then the only thing I could say is that the soul has been presented to us as if it's something we're given at the time of birth. This is all over the world. Religion, you're born as a human being and you have that spark of God, and you can lose your soul. Right? If you don't do the right stuff, he's lost his soul, or this person. And even I use those. We slip into this. We use these types of terms. Actually, we're not even really right at all. The psychologist Thomas Szasz said it in one sentence. He said, the soul is not something that you find or that you have been given. It is something that you create. Once you truly understand this principle, the whole perception of yourself and your life and your purpose on this life and your relationships with other people will fundamentally change for the better. Even though it sounds as heretical as you could get. But we need to grow up. The human race needs to now wake up and grow up and get it. Because the world is moving already. You're going to get this whether you like it or not. These concepts are going to be taught to us through, being dragged or you can accept it. But if you accept that the soul is something you are creating, and you are the sole creator of it, and you create it in what we call life through experience, a different kind of gratitude, a different kind of reverence arises. And also what arises, well, it helps us with that whole thing of separating ourselves from the crowd, which I said was important earlier. That's one of the things that will really help you do that. And secondly, what it really means is that no one else can really help contribute to that. Because, of course, that person has to deal with developing their soul, which is different from yours. So immediately you've broken this consensus trance. You may look to other people as guides, as I do. I've got my heroes, I've got my, mentors. But I realize that they're guides. The teaching doesn't belong to them. They can't territorialize it. But they may present an aspect of the teaching, you see. Just like, the facets of a diamond, reflect different aspects of light. So that's okay, that's fine. They're presenting their cuisine in a different way, But never lose sight of the fact that you are in the very process of creating your soul, and the agonies that you feel, and the sorrows, and the feelings of loss, and the euphoria that you feel and the ecstatic and the peak experiences and the relationship that you have with music and with animals and nature and human beings, all of this is you taking that lump of clay that was given to you and trying to turn it into this beautiful thing of your own creation. What most people have done, it just underlines what we've been talking about, is they go, oh, I can't be bothered with all that, getting the hands dirty. I'll stand back and bring in an expert. He's a good sculptor, let him try it. Or, hey mate, can you do it? They go, oh, sure. And everyone is modeling everybody else's clay.